In this lecture, we'll learn about the button component. Buttons are used for actions in forms, dialogues, and more. They are available in different variations, in different sizes, with different states, and as either checkboxes or radio buttons. We can get a quick overview of all the possibilities when we scroll the page here. The default button is created by using the button tag with the type button and the class btn. We also add an additional class to give the button a specific styling. They are prefixed with btn dash, and first we'll create a primary button with the class btn primary. There are 6 types of buttons, so let's now create the other ones. Button number 2 is a secondary button with the class btn secondary. Button number 3 is a success button with the class btn success. Button number 4 is an info button with the class btn info. Button number 5 is a warning button with the class btn warning. And button number 6 is a danger button with the class btn danger. Let's have a look. For specific needs, we can also make the button appear as a link by using the class btn link. When we look at it in the browser, we'll see that it looks just like a regular link. This default button style can also be applied to anchor tags and input elements. Let's see how. We create a basic anchor tag with a role attribute with the value button for accessibility reasons, and then use the same classes as before, for example btn and btn primary. For input elements, we add the type button and then use the same classes as before, for example btn and btn success. We'll give the input the value input. The same markup is used for turning a submit button into a default button. This time we'll make it a warning button and use the value submit. As you might have guessed, this markup is also used for turning a reset button into a default button. Let's make this a danger button with the value reset. Let's have a look. As we can see, our newly created buttons made out of an anchor tag and different input tags all look like default buttons. They also have the same subtle hover effects as the buttons made out of button tags. Now let's look at how we can make a variation of this default button style. We can create an outline style of the button by appending the word outline in the middle of the style classes like this. Let's see how it looks. The buttons are now transparent with a colored outline and only have a background color on hover. Now let's see how we can change the size of the buttons. To do this, we add the class btn sm to make it smaller and the class btn lg to make it larger. These sizing classes changes the padding of the button, and to make it the full width of the parent element, you can add the class btn block. Let's create some different sizes of the rest of the buttons and then have a look in the browser. At the top, we see the inline style buttons in the 3 different available sizes, and at the bottom we see the block style buttons in the 3 different available sizes. Now let's look at the different states you can give the buttons. To make a button appear as the active one, simply add the class active. You should also add the area pressed attribute with the value true for accessibility. When we look at it in the browser, we can see that the active button gets a darker color. To create a disabled button, we don't add the class disabled, but instead use the native disabled attribute on the button element. However, if we are using an anchor tag as our button, we can't use the disabled attribute, but need to add it as a class. For anchor links, we also need to give it the role button and add the area disabled attribute with the value true for accessibility. When we look in the browser, we can see that they look exactly the same as we would expect, but only the button created with a button tag has the special disabled cursor when hovering the button. Now we'll learn how to toggle the state. We'll create a normal button with an active state like before. And this time we'll also add the area toggle attribute with the value button and the area pressed attribute with the value true. We'll also create a button that doesn't have the active state, and therefore we need to change the value of the area pressed attribute to false. To style checkboxes as buttons, we first need to create a parent element with the class btn group and a data toggle attribute with the value buttons. Inside this, we now create our first checkbox. Our normal classes for a button should be applied to the label tag like so. Inside this, we create our input tag with the type checkbox and some label text right after it. Now we'll just duplicate this a few times. To make a checkbox pre-checked, we simply add the attribute checked to the input tag and the class active to the label tag. Let's see how it looks. The pre-checked checkbox has been highlighted and we can check and uncheck any of the checkboxes. We can do something similar for radio buttons. First we create the same parent element with the class btn group and a data toggle attribute with the value buttons. Inside we create the label tag and we give it the classes btn and btn success. Now we just need to create the input tag with the type radio, the name attribute with the value options, and a unique ID. We also add the label text right after the input element. To make a radio button pre-selected, we just add the attribute checked to the input tag and the class active to the label tag. Let's see how it looks. The pre-selected radio button has been highlighted, and we can select and deselect any of the radio buttons. We have now learned how to create buttons for actions in forms, dialogues, and more. Go on and continue with the coding exercises, which will help you learn the correct structure for this component. In the next lecture, we'll learn how to create and use the button group component.